friends, I'm Daniel Nesbitt, and welcome back to the Fixing Your Font series. So up to this point, we've been making some pretty good progress with the lowercase letters, and I thought in this episode it might be kind of fun to switch over to the uppercase just to kind of bring that a little bit more in line and catch it up with the lowercase letters that we've designed. So with the uppercase, there are going to be a few that are going to be pretty easy to get out of the way, but I figured it would be good to start with those, and then we can kind of work from there. So the plan is I want to talk about the OH, capital O and capital H. I'm also going to bring up my lowercase n and o as well, and the reason that I'm doing this is because these are, of course, our control characters, so I want to make sure that I have these two letters in good form before we start jumping off into some of the other uppercase letters. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to take a look at this uppercase H. And if I just do a quick look here, you'll notice that, again, as I've done before, all of my strokes are the same width. And it might be a little bit difficult to tell, but typically we want to create a little bit more variance in that. The other thing that we want to do is that we want to make our uppercase letters just a tiny bit thicker than our lowercase letters. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to just bump this out a little bit. And if I do my math, or if I counted my clicks right, which I didn't, but we should have about 85 units width. Another good way to do this is if you just want to go through, since this is a square, we can use our little transform panel down here and accomplish that same thing. So there isn't a whole lot of difference here, but what this is doing is it's giving the vertical lines here a little bit more weight than the horizontal lines, because as I've mentioned in the past, that our eye tends to give a little bit more weight to horizontal lines, so we're just kind of correcting an optical illusion there. The other thing that I'm going to go ahead and do as well, just looking at the H next to the N and the O, is I am going to bump this out in width a little bit, and I'm actually going to move my my O out of the way so that I can do this. I'm also going to add a space here so I can use one to kind of adjust while I look at the other in context here. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to bump this out. I don't really think it needs to go out a ton, but something just a little bit wider. It didn't need to go very much. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. And then the last thing that we're going to do, I have 60 units on either side of the N here. So we're just going to go through and we're going to keep the 60 there. I think I'd mentioned this before, but I'm not really focused too much on spacing. This series is primarily focusing on the letter construction. So now we're going to pop that O back in there, and as I had mentioned before with the lowercase o, we don't want it to be a perfect circle, and we also don't want it to be an even uniform weight, which again is 80 points all the way around here. So there's a couple ways that I could go and handle the O. One is I could try and remember everything that I did on this lowercase o, and because I have the benefit of a YouTube channel, I could go back, watch that episode, reapply all of that to the O, and we'd be good to go. But I wanted to show a different way that you're able to effectively kind of get the same idea or the same feel with maybe a different approach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete that art that I had there. I'm going to go and I'm going to add in my lowercase o, and I just added it in as a component, so that's why it's all non-editable here. I'm going to right click and hit decompose. So now I have a copy of my lowercase o. I could have copied and pasted this as well, but again, I want to do something a little bit different. So something that I like to do with letters like O that are usually just a larger or smaller version of their upper or lowercase counterpart is take this approach instead. The reason that I like doing that is oftentimes when I'm adjusting a letter like this, I want to keep a lot of that same DNA or same style to it that I had on the, in this case, the lowercase o. Now, there is a few things that I will want to do here, all of which include things like adjusting the width a little bit so that it looks a little bit more in line with the H. And as you'll also notice when I scaled that up, that this O now looks quite a bit bolder than the H as well, which is probably not something that we want. So what I want to do here is we've got 100, it looks like about 102 or so units of space there. We've got 107 there. What I'd like to do is cut that down to 85 and 75. One trick that I have to accomplish just this is I'm going to go through and I'm going to draw a box that is 85 by 85. And I'm going to take the right edge of it and line it up with the right point on my letter there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this inner circle here. Holding down my Option key, I'm just going, or actually, yep, there we go, Option key. And I'm just going to drag it out. So this is resizing it from the center, which is what I want. And now I should have 85 units of width. I'm actually going to move this square out of the way because we'll use that later. But if I zoom back in, you notice we've got 85 units of space between those 2 points, which is perfect. All right. So now we'll go up to the top, and we're just going to effectively do the same thing. So I'm going to align the top points, and rather than 85 units of space, we're going to go down to 75. You don't really need to make this square. I just do because it's kind of how my mind works. But so we'll jump back, and again, holding down the Option key, and we're just going to adjust it so that we get that 75 units of space. So now we've got 75 there, we've got 85 there. That does kind of go a little bit against this, which is 80 units here. I could probably go through if I wanted to, if I want to go back and just kind of readjust that a little bit. Also just going to kind of bump that crossbar up a little bit more so we get more of a visual evenness than a perfect evenness. But already, I mean, we're looking pretty good here. The other thing that I might consider is just maybe narrowing up the O a little bit more. That could be a possibility. And I'm just using my eye to kind of determine what looks right next to that H. The other thing that I'm going to do, because we have been using it in this series, is I'm going to select all of my points. I'm just going to hit that Fit Curve button just to get us back to that point. Again, I had done it before on this one as well. And I could go through and make sure that it's about where I want it to be, but I'm usually looking at these little lines that are underneath the radio buttons there just to make sure that that I'm keeping things as much in check as I possibly can. I'm also going to go through and reset my side bearings there. So now we've got a pretty decent set of control characters. We've got our optical adjustments in place, we've got our line weights corrected, and we're in a good place now that we can take these uppercase letters here and we can start to bring these into some of the other letters. So the first one that I'm going to tackle here is the the uppercase L. And honestly, in this case, I don't think it was actually too far off, and I have to be honest, that was not by design. But effectively what I'm looking at here is just keeping an idea of how does this line up against that H? Does it visually look like it's the same width? And the funny thing is I think it was actually pretty close the first time. So I guess what are the odds of that? But something to keep in mind is that your L, measurement-wise, sometimes may end up being a little bit narrower than the H. So in this case, my H is about 501 points in width. My L is, by contrast, 434 points of width. So there is a little bit of a difference, but visually they look the same, which is kind of what we're after here. We can go through and we can swap that L out for an E. And again, I'm just kind of keeping these up on screen so you can see one in context as I edit another. The thing with an E is that the horizontal strokes here are often different sizes, and sometimes it doesn't have to be by much. If you're designing something sans serif, if you want to get kind of the Helvetica vibe going on, you aren't going to make too much of an adjustment. But a couple things to keep in mind is that the middle horizontal stroke here should be your shortest, the top should be the second shortest, and then the bottom one should be the longest. It's what kind of gives the E its visual structure that we're after. And then again, we're just going to go through and we're going to bring these in line with the same vertical height that we did on the crossbar of the H. and then I'm just going to go through and line these up. The other thing that I'm going to do is just go ahead and bump the crossbar up a little bit more here. So again, we're hitting that visual midpoint, not the technical one, so there's a little bit less space on the top here, a little bit more space on the bottom, but that's what we're after. Again, width-wise, I don't think we were too far off. Again, this is the same width as the L, and I may bump this out just a little bit more, but I think something like that probably works. We're really just compensating for a lot of visual trickery here because our capital H gives us kind of a start and an end point, whereas letters like the L or the E, it's kind of up to your eye to kind of determine where that end point is, because we don't have another vertical line there that's blocking it off saying this is where the E ends on the right. Now with the F, we could go through and we could make all of these adjustments again, but as you've probably noticed in many of my series, I am a big proponent of copying and pasting, so what I'm going to do is we're going to remove the horizontal strokes there. I'm just going to go ahead and add in the ones off of the E. Now a couple things that I'll do with the H is we've got a little bit more space to play with, so I'll actually drop this arm down a little bit just to kind of fill up that space a little bit more, because rather than having something along the bottom like the E here to measure some negative space, I have the baseline. So that's now what I'm measuring my negative space against, and I kind of want to eat up a little bit more of that. Again, visually, I probably could maybe adjust this back and forth a little bit if I wanted, but I think it's actually pretty good there. So we're going to go ahead and call that F good to go. So if I jump back to my screen here, there are letters like the I, which I really don't think I have too much to add to. And maybe you were kind of wondering what I would have to say about that. In this case, the I is nothing more than a vertical bar, so I just want to acknowledge that there probably isn't a whole lot that I would do here. Typically when you're drawing an I, you're probably just riffing off one of the parts of the H, and it usually flows pretty well. If you do have an I with a bar on the top and the bottom, which I suppose we could maybe do here for the sake of just talking about it, but you know, maybe we do something like let's say something like this for the I. I'll just go ahead and center that real quick. Again, I'm just kind of keeping the same philosophy as I did with a lot of the other pieces, where I'm making that vertical line just a little bit thicker than my horizontal line. Again, it's that visual compensation, visual trickery that we're after here. So there we go with the I. We'll just do that for the sake of doing something a little bit different. Another easy win, and I'm all about the easy wins, is we have the Q here. And if I jump over to that, I merged all of my shapes into one here. And as you can see, it's kind of retaining that old shape that we had before we fixed the O. And again, this is one of those things where you can literally just go through and delete that. I'm going to go through and I'm going to add a component again, but this time it's going to be the capital O instead of the lowercase o. And unlike the last time when I brought in the lowercase o into the uppercase O space, I'm not going to decompose this, because if I ever were to go back and adjust this or tweak this, I really don't want to get back into that whole copy and paste thing. But as we know with the Q, there is one additional element to it here, so I'm going to go ahead and add that now. And we'll just do something that kind of makes this look nice. When we get into things like diagonal strokes here, one thing to note is that you will be making it quite a bit thicker than a vertical or a horizontal stroke. So in this case, if I just measure these 2 points, that's about 92 points. But if I just kind of pull that up to the side there, you'll notice is that it looks right. It appears to have approximately the same amount of weight as the oval of the O, I guess in this case, does. And even if I bring up this H next to it here, everything, we're trying to get that to look pretty uniform, like it's fitting in. I could go through and I could maybe adjust this a little bit. Maybe I need to just trim it down a little bit. And I'm only measuring in small increments here, so I went from 92 to 90, but maybe that's enough if this was larger on screen for your eye to kind of re-register it as a different weight. If you're doing smaller letters, if we were going to adjust this for something like 10-point type, for example, you might use a little bit larger increments, maybe 5 or 10 points. But if it's something large on the screen like it is here, really don't have to adjust it too much. And that's the fun part about type, is you get a lot of these quick and easy wins, which is so fun and so rewarding, especially when we're considering that we've got 52 letters on the screen here. I'm not really counting the space because we'll deal with that separately, but when you're going through and you're designing a bit of an alphabet, or even if you're designing an extended alphabet, maybe it's in a different language or a different script, any time that you can take these shortcuts, they're always well worth it. So the last one that I'm just going to kind of focus on, or the last couple that I'll focus on here, is going to be combining some of these control characters. So we have something like the P, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually not going to start with the uppercase O. In this case, I'm going to use the lowercase o as my jumping off point. Now I could go through, so that's 80 across here. Maybe we don't necessarily want to copy and paste that, which is fine. We'll just go through and we'll readjust that. But something that I am going to get rid of is, again, this portion over here, the bowl. And we're just going to copy and paste the O, and I'm just copying and pasting half of it over here. What I can do is I can just use my pen tool to reconnect all of these points so that I have a closed shape, which is something that you always want to have when you're designing a typeface. And the other thing that I'm going to do is we're just going to go ahead and line all of these points up so that they're on the same plane. And that just makes it a little bit easier to kind of move these around. The other thing that I'm going to do is I actually want to bring this up a little bit more. So I'm keeping it a pretty even amount as I'm moving this. Another thing that I could do with the P if I wanted is actually bring in the F next to this if I want to have a little bit of a reference point. I'm not going to probably have these two line up exactly, but if I can kind of get a similar feel to it, that might be a good way to go. The other thing that I might do is just bump in this a little bit more just to kind of focus on that width again. And then if I just go through and select all of these points, I can go back to my fit curve, and we can kind of get that curve back, maybe something similar with what we've got going on with something like the uppercase or the lowercase o. The other thing that I could do is I could even move these points back a little bit if I want to maybe relax that curve a little bit more, which I think that actually looks a little bit better. And then just double checking my my curves here. So again, if we go back to the O, we've got about 85 units there. We have 85 units here, but because this is a bit more of an aggressive curve, I might even go and back this off a little bit. And it's not going to be by much, and in this case I'm only doing 5 points. But sometimes it's those little things that kind of make all the difference. And so we've got our P there. Because we have the diagonal stroke and the Q here, one thing that we can do is, again, similar with what we did with the O and the Q, we can do this with the P and the R. So I'm just going to go ahead and just completely remove the R. We're going to bring in the uppercase P as a component. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically just rip off that tail on the Q. Again, I can kind of bring this in. I'm just going to make sure that I'm on the baseline along the bottom here. And I'm not going to worry about that top quite yet, because the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure that I've got this in kind of a good position. So I'm not technically lining these two up here, but I'm just visually doing my best to line them up. There's going to be kind of on an imaginary plane here, if I just drew a square here. Similar to when I'm drawing a circular character like an O, I do want to have a little bit of overshoot. The thing is that my curve here is going to have less overshoot than the bottom of the leg here, which is going to have a little bit more just because there isn't as much mass kind of on that corner of the R, or on the leg I should say. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for visually when I'm lining this up. I can use the knife tool here just to go through and chop that off where I don't need that extending over, and we've kind of got our R there. A couple things that I could do just to kind of help things out, maybe I kind of tilt that back a little bit more. The other thing that I want to probably do is just taper this in just a little bit. I think I maybe did like 7 or so points there. Because I also tilted it back, I'm going to add a little bit more weight to it just to so that it kind of feels like it's about the same weight. Again, not really worried about spacing. But there you go. So we've got an R that was loosely based off of the Q, which was based off of the O, and you kind of see how all of these things are starting to work off of each other and create our type. If I look at widths, I'm reasonably happy with the different widths that I've got going on here. I think this is probably a good point to continue moving on with some of the different characters that we'll be doing. The other thing that I'm going to do, as I always do, is we're just going to go through. I'm going to select all these, and I've mentioned before, but I am a big fan of color coding things, so we'll go ahead and we'll check those off. And I think at this point that'll be a good stopping point for this episode. So hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you're finding this useful for fixing maybe a current font that you're working on, or just working out something that maybe isn't working with some of your letters. To be honest, I've really been having a lot of fun doing this series. It's fun just to work with a font that has a lot of common mistakes and errors in them, and showing folks how to correct those. If you are enjoying this series, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you haven't already, make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to my channel, because I am constantly working to put out new videos like this all the time. And it's not just this, it's different tutorials, how-tos, tips, tricks, you name it. If you want to learn about type design, I'm the place to do it, I guess. So anything you can do to help me out with that is amazing, and to get more folks aware of these videos. So if you have anybody that you know who's a type designer who enjoys doing this kind of stuff, make sure to go ahead and forward on some of these videos as well, because it's always fun seeing people grow and learn through all this kind of stuff. So that's my spiel for today. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.